Hello there. Apologies for the picture quality. I've got the sun shining in quite brightly there. Let's see if we can figure that out. I might be able to just adjust position a little bit. That's better. Hello there. I've not done many lives on YouTube as Neurodive, so I thought I'd give it a go, see if there's anyone out here that would benefit from a chat, a bit of support, whatever that is. Let me know. But of course, when you're starting out with something like this, or when you haven't given people much warning, then probably useful to have a topic to discuss in the meantime. So today I thought I'd talk a little bit about autistic people and empathy. I have been supporting autistic young people since about 2007. When I first started that, I would hear, I think, some quite negative, misleading ideas that autistic people lacked empathy. And both experientially for myself personally, and also just research, reading, I found out pretty quickly that wasn't necessarily true. Temple Grandin has a really great quote where she says it's not that autistic people lack empathy, and often the non-autistic person will struggle to empathize with the autistic person that's having a meltdown because their favorite toy is broken or something like that. I'm butchering that quote entirely, but the basic premise she puts forward is later researched and articulated by an autistic scholar called Damien Milton, who talked about the double empathy problem. So the idea being that an autistic brain will consider things in a certain way, and therefore will probably empathize with another person who's looking at it in the same sort of perspective, but will struggle to empathize with a different neurotype, in the same way that the non-autistic brain would probably struggle to pick up on the sensory overload that's happening for one person who is autistic. So it's a sort of double clash, if you like. You know, we can't see things from their perspective easily, and vice versa, they can't see things from ours. Very early on, when I was working with young people, I would probably make that mistake. I sometimes now call it neurotypical silver lining, where you kind of paint over something as okay, but in fact you're trying, maybe coming from a good place, trying to reassure, but you're probably just invalidating, to be honest. So their computer time is finished. They're having a really, in my opinion, over responsive dysregulation to it, and I'm there saying, don't worry, you can have that time tomorrow. You know, you knew that time was finishing. For them, in their state of perhaps panic, or, you know, they've perhaps there's a miscommunication. They think I've said that it's finished forever. They haven't conceptualized that they'll be having it tomorrow. You know, there's all these things going on that I'm not aware of or not empathizing with, by just reassuring and saying it's fine, don't worry, because. So there's a bit of a kind of a mismatch there, if you like. Equally, in about 2015, there was a paper that came out that one of my colleagues sent to me, which was the empathy and balance hypothesis, and that talked a lot and presented the idea of hyper empathy in autistic people. And actually what that paper did was kind of confirm that was probably more likely than a lack of empathy. So the idea with that is that there are different types of empathy: cognitive, emotional, compassionate. Although in the empathy and balance hypothesis, I think they only used cognitive and emotional. Compassionate is part of the, I think, Patrick Ike model. Sorry, I need to get better at references. But yeah, so the idea being there that, you know, cognitive empathy is where you kind of label emotions, you have a language, literacy for it, and you can kind of recognize it in yourself and others. And again, there was a lot of research suggesting that a lot of autistic people had alexithymia. They struggled to read emotions, have that language, that literacy. So that part of empathy probably was underdeveloped, if you like. It wasn't not present. And again, it could be supported to develop, which is often the case with many neurological differences, if they are in deficit in comparison to others. I don't really like that word, but so that was a difficulty. But in the next sort of section of empathy, the next kind of representation of empathy, which was emotional, which is where you kind of feel with people, you pick up on the vibes of others and you feel what they're feeling. And again, a lot in the paper, a lot of the autistic people researched were over responsive to that. And that made a lot of sense to me, because when I was supporting young people that were dysregulated, it made a big difference what I did or didn't do, particularly non-verbally. And that wouldn't make sense if they didn't have any empathy. I could have done whatever I wanted and shouted and screamed, and it would make no difference, which is not something I would recommend. So, yeah, a little bit about empathy and the misnomer that autistic people lack it, which is not the case. I'm going to leave this one short. I just wanted to drop in, see if there are people there this type of day. I'll run a few more in the evenings and see what happens. And then if there's an uptake, or that, a few people enjoy and want to leave comments and say more of this, please, and let me know when. I will be back. If not, you might never see me again, which you might not see me in the first place, hence not coming back. So, yeah. Anyway, cheers all.